So our caucus is all willing to put in the work. We have offered to take over social media accounts. We've offered to do those things. But so far, a place hasn't been made for us.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
We have on the line now Haeden Wright. She is president of the Women's Auxiliary down in Brookwood for the minors, UMWA. She's an English teacher, and we brought her on to talk about a lesson that she gave about Cesar Chavez to her children in that discussion. But Adam mentioned that he wanted to get her thoughts, if she had any, about our conversations that we've been having over the last couple of weeks about the state of the Democratic Party. And so with that, Haeden, thanks for jumping on and taking the time to talk to us this morning. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me on today. I always love coming and spending some time with you guys. State of the Democratic Party, that's a good question. I am House District Rep for District 49, and I also sit on the Executive Board for Congressional District 6. I'm the Vice Chair of the Youth Caucus, which I will say our caucus is amazing. They're doing great things, good works. Several of them were actually out with us last night in Bessemer supporting those workers.
That's great.
I wish the main party was interested in actually being out in the field supporting workers. That hasn't really been what I've seen. Some of the candidates were fantastic. They had no really support from the state party. You're talking about Dr. Will Boyd, who's incredible. Lisa Ward, who ran a good campaign. But those were independent campaigns. They were volunteers, they were with themselves. It wasn't with the state party. So I really hate that the party put out statements looking like they should be thanking them for something. I don't really see that having been the case. So right now it's questionable. I do know for a fact last week when it was said that email lists haven't been given, that was inaccurate. They had those prior to the meeting that actually didn't make quorum because it was scheduled at the same time as the Labor Notes Conference, because myself and the chair and then the vice chair of Labor Youth Affairs, which is on the executive board, we spent about 2 weeks getting with all of our members, getting their contact information, compiling it into a document, and making sure that we provided that to the party. So we had gathered all that information over the course of working for several weeks to make sure that they had that prior to that meeting. So I do know that wasn't necessarily accurate when that was stated on the air last week.
That's a shame. I hate to hear that. And so have you... since then, I think it's actually been 2 weeks, maybe even, since we talked to Randy Kelly, and in the intervening 2 weeks, have you seen, I know, obviously, 2 weeks it's enough time to send an email, at least, I think, but it's not, it's not enough to turn the party around. But have you seen anything in the last 2 weeks from the party about moving forward from the elections?
I have not seen anything from the actual party chair. Tabitha has still sent out some communications. We were sent out an email from Joe Reed, which is the other caucus, the minority caucus. He is the vice chair of that caucus. He sent out an email condemning the violence and shooting and showing some support for the LGBTQ community as they're going through that time.
Okay. Well, that's great to hear that there was some statement on that, but definitely a shame that it doesn't seem like there's been a whole lot of work since we've had that conversation with Randy Kelly about building connections within the people that are willing to spend their time working for the party. That's definitely a shame.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll get off this. I just wanted to kind of get your reaction, because I know you listened. I know you were in the chat. I know the people who were talking and calling. But, it seems to me that there is a dedicated core of people in Alabama who are committed to progressive social change, who are willing to do something about it. The fact that we had over 100 people come to the Troublemaker School, the fact that, folks like you and Big Mike and others are able to pull dozens of people to these events all over the state. There is a core group of people out there who are willing to do some work. I think there's a disconnect with that and the political party as a whole. And what I hope is that the dedicated core can start to build a coalition statewide, whether the ADP leadership is on board or not. But there has to be a coalition of working class people, a diverse coalition, if we're ever going to make any progress in this state. And I think we have some good, talented, organizing-minded folks who can put our heads together, develop a platform and a program that appeals to people, and get candidates that can advance that program. So I'll get off my soapbox there.
Yeah, and I would like to point out the people in the chat that were chatting in, that called in afters, those were all members of the Youth Caucus. So our caucus is all willing to put in the work. We have offered to take over social media accounts. We've offered to do those things. But so far, a place hasn't been made for us. So I think that's the big thing, is that if you want progress, everyone deserves a place. And I'm sorry, that is Everly who's trying to tell y'all hello.
Hey, Everly.
Hello. Yeah, well, and
growing like a weed.
Yeah, no kidding. Now Everly is the one that she was born right before the strike began, right? Did we lose?
That's correct.
Oh,
It was only 4 months old when we went on strike. So that's all she really knows is being on strike.
I couldn't imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just picturing her, the little baby that we met in Brookwood, last May, and now here she is. So it's definitely wild to think about. I was mentioning before you came on the air that Kim Kelly had a recent article out in Jezebel that I thought did a very good job highlighting you and your sisters who have been so involved in this strike. Is there any kind of anything to report to us now that we're at over day 600? I know you had International UMWA President Cecil Roberts in attendance recently, and the actions that y'all took. Anything to share with us about the state of the strike?
I would say definitely the actions are still being planned. That was just the start. We're planning on picking things back up. What people don't understand sometimes is they're like, well, why haven't you been doing this the whole time? Well, we've been under huge injunctions with massive penalties. That's like the reason why we didn't sit down in the road. It's because we were facing, because of Alabama's unfriendly worker laws and the reason they don't want people to perform civil disobedience that brings change, we could have actually gone to jail for 30 days and had a $200,000 fine. Just for civil disobedience, just for a peaceful protest.
Right.
Protesting working conditions and freedom of speech could have gotten us put in jail for 30 days, which is absolutely insane that that's the state that we live in. So I think that's something people need to be aware of, that needs to change, that we can't be afraid because we're being threatened with absurd penalties for displaying our basic rights that should be constitutionally protected.
Absolutely. I mean, this is what's our state motto? We dare defend our rights.
Right. Yeah.
Well, Haeden and about 1,000 of her friends have tried to dare defend their rights.
Yeah.
And we see the state of Alabama
is trying to stop them from doing
right.
it. Yeah. Well, let's.
With Jacob one time, to where when we were out doing a demonstration, to where one of the cops said, no, your freedom of speech only is valid based on time, place, and interest of the government. Is a video. We have him on video saying that. That's absolutely not what the Constitution says, but that's what we're up against here now.
Well, it's probably the most honest answer he could have given you, though, in some ways.
Well, so, we appreciate that update on the strike, and you have been, and I'm sure you'll continue to keep us up to date on anything, and we'll try to make it out there as often as we can, especially when there's a big action. But the reason that I wanted to bring you on today mainly was in the other hat that you wear when you're not, keeping working to keep alive the longest ongoing strike in the country right now, which, I assume is just incredibly easy and you've got lots of spare time from doing that. But in your other hat as a teacher here in Alabama, you said the other day on Twitter, we had some amazing discussion in my English 10 class yesterday. We are reading and analyzing Cesar Chavez's address to the Commonwealth Club of California, which led to a discussion and additional readings of how child labor is still happening in Alabama and the country today. And I thought that was like fascinating that you were able to have that discussion with your kids and sophomores in high school. And so I thought that I was like, well, yeah, that would be a really good thing to talk to her about on the show. Talk about how her students received that. And so before we talk about their reaction to the piece, give us just like a synopsis, a SparkNotes version of the address to the Commonwealth of California. What was Cesar Chavez, a leader of the United Farm Workers Union? What was he trying to get across in that address?
So how we framed this whole unit in reading was we were looking at how an individual can change society, how an individual can come together with other individuals for a common purpose and make change. So we read the address, we broke it down into chunks, and what some of my students said that they took away from it as we were reading is that workers were taking the blame for everything, that workers were being exploited, workers were dying in the fields, but yet anytime anything happened, crops failed. Anytime the environment was questioned, that these growers would turn around and blame the workers, and they would be punished for that. To where, in fact, they were working with poor living conditions, and we broke it down that way. We had also, prior to this, had read the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire articles. We had also went and read the St. Petersburg Workmen's Petition that led to the Bloody Sunday Massacre. And then in correlation with this reading that we did with Cesar Chavez, we read the poem Immigrants in Our Own Land, which is Jimmy Baca's poem, where it talks about the dream of coming to America and creating this better life, and quickly seeing that that wasn't the case, that once you came here, things didn't get better. For most people, they got worse, that your conditions were actually worse than before. And for a lot of people, that led to incarceration. So we talked about how being incarcerated in the prison system played into you were either a worker in the field that was being treated basically like a slave, or you became incarcerated, in which case you were again treated as less than human. And how the dreams that those people had when they came here were the same, but the outcomes were drastically different. So I think what I wanted them to take from that is that they have the power to make those changes. When they see an injustice happening, that they have the voice to stand up and say something against it, that they don't have to be afraid. And I think it's important to note that I have a very diverse school to where I work, to where I do have a good amount of Hispanic students. I do have a good amount of Black students. I do have white students. So it's a very diverse makeup. And most of my students in class, when I asked them at the beginning, they want to go into the workforce. Some of them want to go to college. Most of them want to go into the workforce. So as a teacher, I feel like it's my job to teach them how to advocate for themselves, to teach them what their options are, to let them know about people that fought to give people the rights, to give people the workplace safeties, to give people what they have now, that those weren't always given, that people, no matter what, deserve the right to be treated as human beings. They deserve to have representation in their workplace. They deserve to have time with family. They deserve to live, not just survive.
And what was the response from the students? These are pretty young young folks. When you're a sophomore in high school, you're 15, 16, I think is the age. And I don't know, when I was 15 or 16, I don't know how deeply I was thinking about these, serious issues. So what were their reactions to this unit in your class?
I would say this was one of the most engaging units that they were actually a part of the discussion, because a lot of these were like, well, I'm working right now at this fast food place and they don't let me off when I'm sick, and they threaten me if I don't. Well, that's not okay. They really can't do that. it kind of opened up those discussions on even what they're facing personally. And for some of my students, they're like, well, I know that these companies in town are hiring people and working them outside of the hours that they're supposed to. So if they're not supposed to do that, what can we do about it? But then the most meaningful to me was after class, and one of my students came up and gave me a hug and said, Ms. Wright, this is the first time anybody's ever taught something positive about someone from my culture. This is the first time anyone's ever had us read anything and talk about something to where someone that I can relate to, someone that comes from my same background, has made changes and helped people. And that to me was heartbreaking, that they are 16 years old and that up until now they didn't see a voice that was their voice, that it was something that they could represent, that they could strive to. Because she was like, I want to go to college. And she's like, in this reading, he talks about with all these injustices happening, that could never happen. And she said, but now it can. She said, so now I know that I have a place and that it's okay that all these things happened and are still happening. So I think that for me was the biggest reason. And that in itself would have been a reason I'm glad I taught the unit, that I'm glad we did those readings, because it gave those students a chance to see themselves in history, to see themselves in literature, to see that no matter what your background is, that you can make positive changes, that you can be and do whatever you want, that you're capable of anything.
I think that having a teacher like you would be really, really beneficial for so many people in Alabama, to be able to hear from, somebody who understands, the struggles of the working class and what they had to do to get there, and is interested in teaching about those struggles from history. I think that, for that, like, we just don't learn much about how working people changed history. Usually we hear about this or that president or this or that politician or CEOs or Rockefellers, right, or the
great man of history.
Yeah, J.P. Morgan. And I think that, reading that essay from Cesar Chavez, who, he was a union leader, but he was a worker before that, right? And I think that's I'm really glad that it seems like your students reacted positively to that.
And I know there's probably some people questioning, well, what standard was that? Well, now with the new standards for the state of Alabama, you're supposed to focus on literature and voices originating outside of the United States, to where I would really like to encourage teachers to think about using those immigrant voices, so the students still have that base to relate to. And those are really powerful. You can teach them in a way that not only gets them to understand standards like figurative language, repetition, point of view, purpose, tone, theme, but it also gives them the experience they need to be successful in life. Because that's what our goal needs to be, to give them the tools they need to graduate and go into the workplace and decide if something is not right, if something is unsafe, to show them they have a voice. And what we ended up doing was, when we were talking about how they had 6-year-olds voting in elections, that was part of the Commonwealth, that the youngest workers they had actually voted in union elections were as young as 6 years old, because they were working on those farms.
Right.
So I just asked the question. I was like, well, can y'all think of any child labor happening now? And they were like, well, I know that some of us work and we have to get work permits. I said, well, what about kids working in other conditions? And they had no idea, because it hasn't been really widely put on the news or publicized. So we actually then pulled up and read the article about the Hyundai factory here in Alabama, getting caught using underage children in a factory setting. And they were appalled. They were like, how did that happen? How did no one know? They were like, why did no one that was an adult there that knew they were working with them say anything? So for a lot of the kids, they were angry, because it clearly showed in that article that, oh yeah, I knew I was working next to a bunch of 15-year-olds.
Right.
But nobody did anything. So we talked about how dangerous it is to be complacent in your workplace, that how not wanting to stir the pot, or not wanting, or being afraid really to have a voice, is damaging to everyone. So I think that they were really kind of surprised and shocked, and I heard them kind of talking about it in the hallway to other people, like, hey, did you know here in Alabama at the Hyundai plant, they got caught with 15-year-olds working all night, you know?
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, definitely more productive, probably more productive conversations than children have in school hallways sometimes.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I got to say, I think it's fantastic as a former educator. I know that feeling you had when that girl gave you a hug after class, and that made it all worth it, all the time and energy you put into that. And I want to echo your sentiments. I want to encourage educators who may be listening to think outside the box, be bold in your choices, not just with the types of lessons you teach and the way you teach them, but with the text you're reading. Make sure it's reflecting the diversity of the students you're serving. And, I think there's an opportunity to do a lot while still teaching the standards. If you know what you're doing as a teacher, you can teach some pretty bold things and really shake people's mindsets and still be able to say, I'm teaching what the state of Alabama requires me to teach.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of teachers in Alabama, because of the environment we're in, self-censor. It's not so much that they're being told by a principal or a parent, you can't teach A, B, and C. That happens, unfortunately, more than it should. But I think a lot of times teachers they sense that environment and they're being a little cautious in what they teach and what they assign to their students to read. And so I think you've given us a great example of how you can be thoughtful, you can be engaging, you can meet students where they're at and get them to engage with content that is pretty deep, heavy material, but in a way that still works for them, and a way where they walked away knowing something more about the world and the society they live in and the society they're going to participate in. I think that's what it's all about, 100%. And you just make me miss teaching when I hear a story like that, or when I hear some of the stories from my wife and how you can just really see a light bulb go off in a student's head, make them think a little differently about something, or in the case of this student, feel seen and feel heard for the first time. That's huge. That's huge.
And I would love to give y'all kind of another update. After that reading, we actually read the graphic novel Mouse.
Okay.
That's what we read next. And I would love for people to understand graphic novels are valid literature. And another kind of wonderful moment in teaching is when you have kids you've never seen read for pleasure, asked to check out the second book from your classroom library. Yeah. I mean, I have 8 books. All 8 of those have been checked out, but they wanted to know more. The students were really engaged. They were like, well, they read about the Holocaust in a history book. That's not the same as actually kind of seeing a story told from someone's perspective. So I actually got with someone from Teen Screen. Sister Kip put me in touch with him. That's a UMWA member. And so next week when we come back, since they said they wanted to learn more about the Holocaust and what it meant to survive, they're actually going to come in and watch a documentary put on by Teen Screen. And then Suzanne, who's a Holocaust survivor, is actually going to Zoom in with them next week to talk about her experience in surviving Auschwitz and answer questions that the students have. So it's things like that get students engaged. It's that life experience of having someone come into the classroom that's willing to be like, okay, let me answer your questions. Let me tell you exactly what it's like from a personal experience. Because I can have them read from the textbooks all day long. That's not going to be nearly as valuable as having someone come in and tell their personal story. So I'm really excited for that. I thought, Adam, especially you, I thought would be really excited.
That is awesome. And I've got to say, like, Zoom has its problems, but like something like that to connect someone to a classroom in Brookwood, Alabama is just really, really cool. I think your kids are going to get a lot out of that, and I think it's great. They're already asking these questions and they're already interested in it. And I think you're right. Yeah, it's one thing to read about it, but it's another thing to actually relate to people on a human level and get in touch with that humanity. So I think that's just brilliant, and I really appreciate it. And if teachers are listening and they're interested in like these types of resources, you probably have some to share, Haeden. I know a couple I would share would be Zen Education Project. Great lessons. I mean, including fully built lesson plans, but a great selection of text, and Teaching for Change is another really good one. Teaching Tolerance, I think, has renamed itself in the last couple of years and is something else. But if you look for Teaching Tolerance, you can find it that way. But those were a couple recommendations I have. Zen Education Project in particular has labor history lesson plans. History teachers, y'all don't do the labor movement justice. Most of them don't. So those are some resources I would encourage folks to check into. And even if you're not a teacher, if you're a parent, I mean, parents, we are the first teachers. And I think we would make a mistake if we assume that our kids are going to get everything they need to know at school.
Yeah.
As great as our schools are in certain ways. But so whether you're a parent or a teacher, talk about these things with your kids from an early age. Talk to them, what is a union? My daughter is in first grade. She does know what a union is. She knows what a strike is. She knows about justice on some level, and I think that's really important. So, Haeden, I really appreciate what you're doing, and I appreciate you being willing to share some of these ideas and hopefully inspire someone else to get creative. I know I've already texted my wife the text of the speech, so maybe her AP language class will be looking at that pretty soon.
Thanks, Haeden. Appreciate your time. You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.